I am so excited about Inktober that I decided to create some new sketchbooks for my two boys and myself. So I am using the technique for this one for my oldest son that I teach in one of my Skillshare classes. It's a mini sketchbook using repurposed cardboard and drawing paper, and then creating the sewn in sections for the pages. So I've measured and marked up and created the binding part of the cover, and then I've measured and trimming down my drawing paper that's going to go inside. So it is double the width of the sketchbook and the same height. And then I fold the signature sections using a bone folder to ensure that I get nice crisp folds. I had to do a little bit of trimming because I was a little too fast in my measuring and marking, but that's often the case when you're folding paper and trying to get it to fit within a book cover. Then I use embroidery floss to sew my pages together. I really love the fun colors of embroidery floss, and it works really great and is a little sturdier than regular sewing thread and is cheaper than bookmaking thread. Then I created a template to mark the holes where I was going to sew my signature, and I'm using my owl to transfer those marks to each of the two sections that I'm going to sew into the sketchbook. And then I do the same thing to create to register the marks on the binding of the sketchbook cover. Then it's a very simple stitch. I go through the middle, and then I go up through one of the end pieces, jump across to the other end piece, working my way to get it to go through the holes, go back through the middle, and then you tie it off. And a double knot is all you need to hold that signature in place inside your book. And then you do the same thing for additional registers. This sketchbook, I created 2 registers because that created enough pages for Inktober. And then I used the book itself to just roughly mark out on the decorative paper that I'm going to use for the cover. I don't do anything fancy here. I just cut it to the same size as the cover. I could have measured this ahead of putting in the pages, but I didn't. So I'm working with it a little bit backwards on this one. I'd like to do some folding and some pressing to get the decorative paper to adhere to the folds that it's going to mimic on top of the cardboard. Then I get my glue ready. I have a lot of PVA glue on hand because I really enjoy bookbinding and bookmaking. So I just decided to be a little sloppy with it, pour it right on there instead of getting a cup. Use an old paintbrush to spread that around. Try to be mindful of the edges. I want it to stick very well along the borders of the sketchbook cover, but I don't want it to seep over and get too much on my pages. Then I press down the center binding first, and then I start pressing out to the pages, and then close it up and keep pressing and folding and squishing and adjusting, using my bone folder to crispen up some of those folds, and that one's done. The next 2 books that I want to make are larger sketchbooks. They are using repurposed old cookbooks. So I got the pages out of the cookbook, save those for future collage projects, and now I am cutting down my drawing paper. I have measured the cover of my sketchbook so I know how big I want my signatures to be. So now I'm just trimming up my Canson drawing paper to get it to fit inside, and then start folding my signatures. I like to fold individual pages at a time so that I get really crisp folds, and that usually makes for a better situation when I'm putting it all together later. And for this repurposed cookbook into a sketchbook, I created 2 registers. And then I'm going to put it together the exact same way I did the mini sketchbook. So I'm counting up my pages, making sure everything is even, and that I have enough pages to complete all of my Inktober and Drawloween drawings in there. I needed a few extra pages, so I found a technique on YouTube where I can use washi tape to connect 2 separate smaller pages to make my folded signature pages. This is amazing because I often don't have enough big paper depending on how many sketchbooks I'm making in a month, and I have tons of washi tape. So finding a new use for washi tape to make sketchbooks was very exciting. So you just lay it across both sides of the paper seams and then trim off the extra. I like to use the bone folder again to make sure the folds are nice and neat. And I'm just repeating this process until I have all of the pages that I need. Double checking it's going to fit into the book. And then this time I decided to just kind of eyeball it. I had already made some holes in this sketchbook binding before. And this sketchbook, after I cut out the pages, I did glue some fabric down with PVA glue to reinforce the binding because it does get compromised a little bit when you take out the bound pages. So I'm using the owl to kind of to make some of my holes a little bit bigger and clean some of them up because I was in kind of a rush when I was prepping that part of the sketchbook earlier. And now I'm using that and my pencil as to line it up and just to make marks on the outside. This is another way that you can register your marks to ensure that all of your stitched holes line up between your signature pages and your book cover. And I'm going back through, making sure that I punch through all the holes nice and clean so that my sewing is very easy. Then I'm going to use embroidery floss again. One thing I didn't mention before, to measure it, I do 3 lengths of the sketchbook, 3 heights worth of the sketchbook. It gives you extra, but that works out pretty great because you don't want to have too little after you've started sewing your sketchbook together. And then embroidery floss has 6 threads to it in one embroidery floss strand. So I like to separate it down to 3 because it's going to get doubled up when I put it. Actually, it's not going to get doubled up for this sewing technique, but 3 is plenty. And then I follow the same system. I go through the center hole, and then I go up to the top or the bottom. Doesn't matter which way you do it. Get it back through both the book binding and the pages. Jump all the way back down. And then I jump back up through that center hole. And then I like to make sure that the thread ends up on either side of that center seam so that when I tie my knot, I am tying it over the line that goes from the top hole to the bottom hole for more security. Make sure you tie this really tight though, because this book I didn't tie it tight enough and I had to do a little extra binding glue to secure it later on. So I've sewn in both signature pages. And my youngest son and I both wanted to do larger sketchbooks for Inktober. So I'm creating a second book. And this one I've already sewn the pages in, but here's where I'm using the PVA glue just to further reinforce the connection of the pages to the binding because I didn't tighten it down enough. You have to really, if you're using a repurposed book cover, you want to make sure that it's nice and tight. So just double check that. And then to help the glue attach, I put the binder clip on it so that it just keeps everything nice and closed and in place while it dries. And that's it.